JHK here for the AllStar, and join me right now is UFC featherweight Norma Dumont. Norma, thank you so much for the time. You're sitting in Las Vegas training very hard for this upcoming fight. How you feeling?
Então sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Bem-vindo você, Norma, que está se juntando a gente agora. Como é que você está? Como é que vem os treinos? Como é que está tudo?
Bom, obrigada pelo convite. Eu estou muito bem, me sinto melhor. Tem um trabalho muito bom aqui, eu gostei muito da mudança para Las Vegas, consegui evoluir muito a parte física e a parte técnica, e estou me sentindo em casa. Realmente estou gostando bastante e pretendo ficar em Las Vegas, morando aqui mesmo para sempre.
So then, thank you very much for the invite. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I feel good. To start with, I have to say I feel really good. I feel even better than before. I'm loving things since I came here to Las Vegas, which is where I'm joining you from now. And here in Las Vegas, being able to take advantage of all the facilities that the UFC make available to us. I've been able to make improvements on the physical side of things. I've been able to make improvements on the technical side of things. So everything is going as well as it possibly could. So much so that Las Vegas is a place that I'm loving, and a place that I intend on staying in. I intend on living here. So everything is going as well as it possibly could.
Sounds good. Perfect. Now, before we get into the training and everything in Las Vegas, I wanted to jump back to her days in Sanda, because I feel like that's going to be a very important aspect of this upcoming fight. Could you talk about when you started training Sanda, and what was it like the first couple of months, or maybe the first year of your training?
Então, antes da gente começar a discutir os pormenores dessa luta e também dos treinos, eu gostaria de voltar um pouco no tempo e de falar sobre a sua experiência no Sanda. Como foi que você acabou conhecendo o Sanda e como foram os seus primeiros anos treinando essa modalidade?
Eu conheci o Sanda quando eu tinha 19 anos. Eu fui numa academia praticar uma atividade que eu já gostava. E aí eu estava procurando uma modalidade de striker. E eu vi a galera, assim, fazendo o jogo, trocando porrada, dando quedas. Eu já treinava jiu-jitsu. Então eu falei, cara, isso é legal. E aí foi no primeiro treino, assim, eu já vi que eu gostava, já levava jeito para aquilo. Com um mês eu comecei a competir no Sanda. 2 anos depois eu fui campeã brasileira e depois 6 vezes campeã estadual. Então foi praticamente um amor à primeira vista.
Então, depois de quanto tempo você foi campeã estadual?
2 anos.
De 2 anos. E depois de um ano
campeã, foi... 2 anos.
Certo.
2 anos eu fui campeã brasileira e 6 anos seguidos campeã estadual.
Ok.
E era da seleção brasileira também. Fiquei 4 anos na seleção brasileira de Sanda.
At the Sanda when I was 19, and that was courtesy of a gym that I was training at and people I was already familiar with. When I came across it, it really caught my eye because I was on the lookout for a kind of a discipline or an opportunity that would allow me to practice a little bit more of my striking. That was an area that I really enjoyed, and I still enjoy, of course. And when I came across Sanda, I saw that it would give me the opportunity to work with striking, to work with knockdowns. So that was something I really enjoyed. And from my first training session, I could see that it was something I had a knack for, so to speak. I could see that it was something I would be really good at. And so that proved to be the case. After 1 year, I was state champion. I was able to defend my status as state champion for 6 years. After 2 years, I was a national champion, and also I spent 4 years with the Brazilian national team. So Sanda is a big part of my background, and it's something that I love and that I really enjoyed my time competing in this discipline.
Being so successful in Sanda, did it ever become boring to you after a while? Did it ever become like monotonous, like something that you didn't get excited for as much?
Então, uma vez que você tinha tanta facilidade assim nessa modalidade, uma vez que você fazia tanto sucesso, não chegou a um ponto que a coisa meio que virou maçante para você, ou, enfim, deixou de te apresentar ou de proporcionar um desafio para você?
Eu comecei a ficar um pouco mais frustrada no Sanda, quando eu fui convocada para ir para o Mundial e eu fui convocada para ir para o Sul-Americano e eu não tinha dinheiro para ir. Então eu falei assim, eu vou ficar aqui, às vezes, treinando e competindo apenas os pequenos, uma vez no ano, competindo um grande, que era o brasileiro, o Campeonato Brasileiro. E toda vez que eu for chamada para ir para fora, eu não vou conseguir. Então, desde que eu comecei realmente a desanimar, voltei a competir jiu-jitsu e depois já estava querendo ir pro MMA.
So then, I wouldn't say that it was the boredom or monotony or the lack of a challenge that led me to becoming frustrated with Sanda. It was more so other things. For example, I was called up to dispute the World Championships. I was invited as well to dispute the South American Championships. And because of a lack of investment, a lack of funding that wasn't forthcoming from any external sources, well, that meant that I couldn't go. Obviously, that was a massive frustration for me. I mean, that left me only being able to compete once a year in a big event, which was the National Brazilian Championships. But I could see then already that there was nowhere really for me to go beyond that. I could see that every time I was invited to compete in an international event outside Brazil, I wouldn't be able to go. So at that stage, I took up jiu-jitsu again, and I started to think about the possibility of getting into MMA.
Not getting the funding, right? Funding is just a massive part of fighting or just sports in general. How frustrating was that for you? Because that, if you did go across seas, across oceans, that could have opened up so many possibilities in that martial art.
Então, o quanto frustrante foi e era de fato para você essa falta de financiamento, né? Uma vez que você teria se beneficiado tanto disso, isso teria aberto tantas portas para você, né? Se você fosse chamado, se você conseguisse, melhor, disputar um campeonato assim internacional no estrangeiro, isso teria sido uma baita de uma oportunidade para você. Então, como que era isso? O quanto você ficava frustrado com isso?
Você acaba desanimando, porque eu já gastava muito dinheiro para ir para os estaduais, para competir o brasileiro. A gente tinha o treino da seleção brasileira, que a cada 2 meses eu tinha que viajar para outro estado, ficar lá quase uma semana treinando. Isso já estava gastando muito dinheiro. Então, eu perdi a graça ali de competir. Eu falei, cara, eu estou gastando e não estou tendo nada de troca. E toda vez que é para eu elevar o nível, que é para um mundial, eu não consigo. Aí eu fui desanimando, e nisso eu comecei a competir o jiu-jitsu e o MMA, e coloquei os alunos para competir e formei 7 campeões estaduais também na modalidade.
No Sanda, no caso?
Isso.
Certo. So then, yeah, absolutely, obviously, a massive frustration, and the funding could have come in and could have replaced the money that I was investing out of my own pocket in my Sanda career, and obviously that led to me becoming massively disencouraged, and I kind of went off the discipline, so to speak, as a result of all of that. I was spending my own money on traveling to compete in state championships. I was spending my own money on traveling to compete in national championships. As I said, I was a member of the national team, and I would actually have to travel around so that I could be with the coach, and I would be able to train with my teammates and coaches there. So that was devastating for me. That was something that was massively annoying and upsetting, and I put a lot into Sanda. I invested my own money, and I also I trained 7 champions. I helped to bring people into the discipline and athletes who were successful in the discipline. So it's something that I gave a lot to, but unfortunately, what I was putting in wasn't the same as what I was getting out. So that's why I decided to go back into jiu-jitsu, to look at the possibility of getting into MMA, which is where I am now. And so, yeah, as I said, massively frustrating for all of those reasons that I've just outlined. But that's life. We have to move on. There comes a point where you have to draw a line and move on.
For sure. And, you drew the line, you transitioned over to MMA. Have you seen the same obstacles throughout your MMA career so far? The same frustrations?
Então, você chegou a ponto de reconhecer ali que não adiantava mais você competir nessa modalidade do Sanda, por mais frustrante que fosse isso, né? E depois, então, migrou para o mundo do MMA. E falando então de obstáculos, você se deparou com outros obstáculos, até mesmo obstáculos semelhantes aos que você enfrentou no Sanda, agora no MMA, na sua carreira no MMA?
No MMA, O grande problema que eu tinha é arrumar adversário para lutar. E por causa também que eu lutava na divisão de 61 quilos, eu tinha dificuldade para cortar o peso, por ser um atleta já grande para a divisão. E os eventos no Brasil, os adversários, eles escolhem com que eles querem lutar. E eu sendo uma adversária dura, assim, adversária mais difícil, ninguém queria. Quando tinha a oportunidade de lutar, eles queriam casar a luta com 2 semanas. Eu não conseguia bater o peso na divisão de 66 quilos, que é o peso pena, não tinha ninguém para lutar. Então eu comecei a achar muito difícil, assim, realmente começamos a tentar eventos internacionais. E quando a gente começou a tentar os internacionais, mesmo apenas com 4 lutas, foi o UFC que foi o primeiro a interessar e chamar. Então foi, assim, difícil, principalmente por causa do peso, que não muitas atletas femininas.
So then, yeah, of course there are obstacles, but the obstacles that I faced in MMA would be obstacles of a different nature. I would say that the greatest obstacle I face in MMA has been the trouble or the work that goes into actually finding an opponent. You know, it's incredibly difficult, not least because I fight at 61 kilos. So if I want to go down, it's difficult for me to cut weight, and any opponent from lower category probably isn't going to want to come up to fight me, because that would obviously be very difficult for them. So that really does make things complicated. And also historically, looking back at the events that I would fight in, the MMA events, this is in Brazil, it would be the athletes themselves who would choose their opponents. It wouldn't be kind of a matchmaking situation where you have with the UFC who decide who's going to face who. The athletes would choose who they wanted to face, and nobody would want to face me because I fight hard. I'm certainly a difficult opponent for anybody out there. And because I fight at 61 kilos, that's a category that, you know, most athletes are at that, and they're going to have to come up to fight at. So that just makes things really complicated in terms of finding an opponent. And when an opponent would, in the rare case that an opponent would want to fight me, they didn't give me enough notice. They'd maybe give me 2 weeks notice, and that would make things a nightmare for me. I'd have to cut weight. I'd have to do all of my preparation 1 or 2 weeks out from the fight. So listen, that was just an absolute nightmare. And because of that, that's when I really started to look at the possibility of international events that would afford me the opportunity to circumvent some of those obstacles. And that's actually when the UFC came in. So even though I only had 4 fights on my record at that stage, it was actually the UFC who came in and who gave me the opportunity to fight in their promotion. So that's how all of that happened. And that, as I say, was my biggest difficulty in MMA. It was the difficulty to be able to find opponents and to make fights.
Yeah, your UFC debut, you know, you jump in against Megan Anderson in basically a title eliminator after 4 fights in MMA. Can you take us through that fight week and explain how you benefited from that experience?
Então, na sua estreia no UFC, você pegou a Megan Anderson, né? Você entrou tendo realmente uma prova de fogo ali, né? Realmente uma luta de grande repercussão, de grande interesse por parte do público, e foi realmente uma luta bastante notável, né? Então eu gostaria de saber como que foi para você, não só a luta em si, mas todo o entorno, né? Todo o processo, todo o extra-octógono, por assim dizer, como que foi a semana da luta. E eu gostaria também de saber se você aprendeu alguma coisa com tudo isso, com essa experiência da sua primeira luta dentro do UFC.
A minha primeira luta do UFC, ela foi, que eu posso dizer assim, a abertura para a minha evolução. Primeiro, porque nunca é fácil. Você chegar a primeira vez a lutar na organização, independente de quem seja, não é fácil. A Meg era uma atleta difícil, uma ex-campeã do outro evento invicta, era uma atleta já muito testada, porém, tecnicamente, a gente sabia que era melhor que ela na trocação quanto no jiu-jitsu. Só que uma coisa que pesa muito ali dentro, a gente sabia que isso a Mega tinha mais, era a experiência. Quando você começa, eu tranquila até a hora que abriu a cortina e eu vi o público. E no Brasil, a gente não luta com um público desse tamanho. E quando eu vi a torcida, aquele monte de gente na sua cara ali, tipo, cara, eu fiquei muito adrenalizada. Eu queria fazer a luta de um jeito incrível. E aí eu saí do plano de luta. que era um plano de luta estratégico. Controlar o primeiro round, né? A Mega tem uma queda muito grande, porque ela corta muito peso. Então, ela tem uma queda muito do primeiro para o segundo round. E eu não tive essa paciência. Então, foi uma grande experiência para mim. Foi onde eu evolui muito, inclusive a parte mental. Não só a parte física, que também veio evoluindo depois, mas também a parte mental, de que você sua pressão, sua adrenalina ali dentro, seus batimentos cardíacos.
Maravilha. So then, that first fight for me, I like to say that it represented what I would like to call an opening or an opportunity for my evolution and for my progression thereon. Of course, any first fight, any debut you take is going to be extremely difficult, regardless of the opponent. And that's just part of fighting and a part of life. And then speaking about the opponent herself, that was obviously another big challenge, because Megan is an ex-champion from another promotion, as everybody knows. Now, that's not something that maybe shook me or worried me in terms of my talent and my capability, my ability. I believe that I'm a more capable, that I'm a more talented fighter than her. But listen, whilst I might have talent, whilst I might have all the ability in the world, at that stage, I didn't have the experience at this level, at this kind of scale of public interest and exposure. And she had all the experience in the world compared to me. So that was a big difference maker there. And I can tell you that kind of when I walked out and when I saw the supporters there, when I saw all of the fans, that got my adrenaline pumping, and it got my adrenaline pumping in a way that it shouldn't. You know, at that stage, we need to be calm, we need to be strategic, we need to be thinking about the fight, and we can't let ourselves get carried away by those factors. And because of all of that, I have to say, or I have to confess rather, that I kind of abandoned my game plan. My game plan was highly strategic. I wanted to control the first round and then really start working on things therein, because, you know, when I analyze Megan with my team, everybody knows that she's tall. There's a massive weight loss there. That means that after the first round, she loses a lot of gas. So if I had the wherewithal, if I had the strategic thinking with me at that time, if I hadn't allowed myself to get so into the adrenaline, the occasion, you know, I could have taken the fight beyond the first round and I could have won it from there. But that's not something that I did. I made that mistake. I didn't stick to my game plan. But listen, that was an absolutely massive learning opportunity for me. And it isn't a mistake that I've made again since then. So as I said, it was certainly a real learning curve for me, as steep though it might have been. And I like to think that I've been able to make a lot of progress as a result of that.
After that fight, you came back strong. You've won 2 straight. You talk about in other interviews the mental side of the game. Were there a lot of inner battles throughout that time for yourself, you know, coming back off your first loss?
Então, depois dessa luta, você voltou realmente muito forte, ganhando 2 lutas na sequência, o que realmente é muito admirável. E, pô, eu gostaria de saber, e é uma coisa que você comenta bastante, né, nas outras entrevistas suas que eu assisto, que acompanho você, que você fala muito, assim, da importância do mental, né? Então, bom, como é que você explicaria a sua visão, assim, desse aspecto, e o quanto isso é importante para você? Alguma coisa?
Eu falo que, assim, tem muita gente que às vezes me pergunta sobre a luta da Megan, por exemplo, se hoje eu teria aceitado aquela luta, porque eu realmente não precisava estrear com a Megan, mas foi a luta que me ensinou a trabalhar minha parte mental. Foi nessa luta que eu entendi o tanto que é importante você entrar dentro do octógono para apresentar uma performance, não para brigar com pessoas. E isso, quando eu aprendi isso, com essa luta, eu terminei a luta, eu saí, sentei, meu treinador, e ele falou assim, e aí, como é que você tá? Eu falei, cara, eu tô bem, eu não sei por que eu saí do plano de jogo. Ele falou, então nós vamos ter que ver o que aconteceu. E nisso eu procurei, né, um psicólogo, porque eu me cobrava durante a luta. Eu estava segurando a luta na grade, eu estava ganhando a luta, e na minha cabeça eu ficava o tempo todo assim, você tem que fazer mais, você tem que fazer mais, você tem que fazer mais. Então, eu saí daquela luta e falei, eu preciso aprender a lidar com minhas próprias cobranças. E foi aonde eu fui procurar um psicólogo que me ajudou, conversou, e ele me explicou que ali dentro não é uma briga, ali dentro é uma apresentação. e que toda a minha história de vida não pode entrar ali dentro comigo. Que ali eu tenho que fazer um show, eu tenho que apresentar para as pessoas a qualidade técnica que a Norma, artista marcial, tem. E foi isso que me ajudou. E hoje eu entro nas lutas bem, bem tranquila, pensando realmente em me divertir, em vez de brigar. Isso me ajudou muito.
Beleza. So then, a lot of people, going back to that mental side of things that you just referred to, I would accept that. Not least because Megan wasn't, or Megan, should I say, wasn't an opponent that I needed to accept, you know. But I wouldn't change a thing, because it was in that fight that I really had the opportunity to learn and appreciate the importance of the mental side of things in a way that I haven't done so before. I learned that when you enter the octagon, it's not about taking on an opponent. It's not about proving any sort of personal point. It's about putting on a show. It's about having a strategy, having a game plan, and sticking to it, being as strategic as possible, and putting on a presentation, putting on a show for people in that sense. It's almost as if it were a science, you know? And so after that fight, it bothered me the way it had gone. It obviously bothered me, the fact that I had lost. Nobody wants to lose. So I sat down with my coach, and, you know, we said, okay, we're going to have to look at how things are from the mental side of things. We're going to have to maybe make a few tweaks in that sense. And so from that point, I decided that it would be a good decision to go and see a sports psychologist. So what I did with that sports psychologist, or the benefit and the vision that sports psychologist brought to me, was to be able to deal with my own expectations, with the demands that I put on myself, which are really high. And even looking back at the fight, I can remember that during the fight, I was thinking to myself, okay, I'm doing well, but I need to be doing more. You know, I remember that I had her against the cage. I felt like I was absolutely in charge of proceedings, and I wasn't able to be content with that. I wasn't able to be calm with that. I wanted more and more. That really, it was a mistake from the psychological point of view. So this psychologist, they were able to help me to address that, to rein that in, to be in control of my mentality. And another thing that this experience with the psychologist really brought to me was that I learned that it's not about my life story. I'm not bringing my emotional baggage or my whole life with me into the octagon. You know, it's just about me as a martial artist, showing people what I can do as a martial artist, sticking to my strategy and operating in that sense, you know. And today I can say that I'm able to enter the octagon with absolute peace of mind. I'm able to enter the octagon and enjoy myself, put on a show, and I go as far as to say that it's something that I'm able to have fun with now. So that's a massive adjustment that I've been able to make in my game in terms of the mental side of things. And that's something that I was able to learn from that defeat. And then those two victories that you mentioned that I was able to put together on the spin after that loss, I would say that these psychological tweaks that I made had a massive part to play there.
You mentioned fighters carrying in a lot of baggage into the cage, right? Do you feel like that's the biggest struggle for most fighters, not just yourself? You know, from you being around fighters and being around coaches and talking with them, do you think that that's what is it?
Então você mencionou agora que quando você entrou no octógono contra a amiga, você meio que carregou junto com você toda essa bagagem emocional, né? Toda a sua história de vida. Acho que foram essas palavras que você usou. Então você acredita que não só no seu caso, mas falando agora da categoria como um todo, né? Dos seus colegas lutadores, você acredita que isso seja um problema assim generalizado, um problema com o qual muita gente sofre?
Muito. Se você pegar atletas que às vezes têm uma história de vida um pouco mais pesada, um pouco mais difícil, a maioria, a gente fala que você consegue ver no olhar do atleta que ele tem isso, ele traz isso, essa briga, essa guerra diária para dentro do octógono. Alguns conseguem se beneficiar com isso, são muito agressivos, machucam seus adversários, outros perdem a cabeça, cansam muito rápido, porque isso também aumenta a sua adrenalina, aumenta a pressão que você sente, que você... Poxa, eu saí de uma situação ruim de vida e agora eu tô tendo a chance da minha vida. Isso traz muita emoção pro cara. E isso não é bom. Alguns conseguem se beneficiar com isso, mas geralmente o cara tem que aprender a lidar. E os que conseguem lidar com isso, os que aprendem a usar isso na forma certa, são os caras muito aguerridos, É o cara que não vai desistir por nada lá dentro, em qualquer situação que você colocar, o cara não vai desistir, a não ser que o árbitro interfira. Porém, ele vai conseguir controlar vamos dizer assim, os demônios dentro dele. Então, quando o cara alcança esse ponto, ele se torna, de fato, talvez os atletas mais perigosos das divisões aí que você vai ver. São os atletas que têm uma história de vida um pouco mais carregada.
Good question. Absolutely, it is a massive problem. So a lot of the athletes we see, I'm sure you know, and the fans who are watching would know. I mean, we like to read up on the stories of our favorite fighters. We like to see, the situations that these guys have come from and what kind of lives it is that they've led. And yeah, there's no way to get around the fact that a lot of fighters, come from tough situations. They come from pretty hard up backgrounds, and you can see that in your eyes. You can often say, or the way that I look at it, or the way that I like to describe it is that, when you look them in the eyes, you can see that history of, that kind of daily battle, just maybe to keep themselves going. Maybe there wasn't any certainty as regards to the fact there might be food on the table or that kind of thing. So yeah, people bring a lot of baggage with them. Absolutely, they do. Now, this isn't necessarily something that's a problem for everybody. Of course, there are some athletes that are able to extract some benefit from that, and it could be almost, it could be something valuable to them. It could bring them some benefit, mentally speaking. But others, and I would say that the majority of athletes who would find themselves in this situation or would match this description, they tend to lose their head a little bit in the octagon. The adrenaline goes up, the heartbeat rate goes up. They get they lose their emotional control. Maybe they lose their ability then to stick to a game plan, that kind of thing, that kind of problem that I've been through before myself. So most people or the athletes who have difficulty with that, what they need to do is to learn to control that. They absolutely need to learn to control that, but that can be a massive stepping stone for greater success for them in their careers. I like to say, and we all see, that the athletes who are able to kind of rein in their demons, to control their demons, and to get on top of the mental side of things, well, then they transform into much more determined fighters. They transform into much more controlling fighters, and they transform into fighters that are just absolutely never going to give up inside that octagon, unless, of course, the referee comes in with a stoppage.
October 16th, UFC Fight Night in Las Vegas, the main event. You're facing Holly Holm, a former champion. Do you feel like all of the struggles, all of the experiences, everything that you have gone through, and then all the things that you've added to your camp, it's like a perfect storm for you to head into this fight?
Então, de 16 de outubro, você enfrenta a Holly Holm, ex-campeã. Vai ser uma baita de uma luta, né? Vai ser um baita evento. E falando agora, como a gente estava conversando até agora sobre assim, essa bagagem, essa sua história de vida e a forma como tudo tem desenrolado, você acredita que isso tudo seja como se fosse aquela tempestade perfeita para você? Você acredita que todas as condições assim sejam boas, sejam até mesmo ideais para você?
Eu te falo que eu acho que eu estou no meu melhor momento. Estou mais tranquila que nunca. É até estranho, como dizem, né? Poucos problemas, apenas focado na luta. Isso já é quase um milagre. E eu acho, de verdade, assim, uma luta que vai mudar minha vida. Entendeu? Eu espero realmente fazer uma grande luta, não só vencer, mas vencer muito bem, para ganhar esse público também, para que as pessoas, para me tornar uma estrela da organização também, né? E trazer pessoas para assistir, para acompanhar, para ver. Eu sei que não é uma tarefa fácil. A Holly, né, todo mundo conhece, sabe as qualidades que ela tem, não são poucas, mas eu acredito que eu tenho mais qualidades que ela tecnicamente, fisicamente, eu posso vencê-la. E eu quero fazer isso. Eu sei que a Holly tem muito mais experiência que eu, mas eu evolui muito. E eu levo isso como vantagem para mim. Eu vejo os atletas, a maioria não evolui a cada luta. E eu estou evoluindo a cada luta. Ainda estou longe do meu auge, mas eu estou buscando a cada dia trazer uma norma mais agressiva, uma norma mais técnica. E isso que eu acredito que vai fazer a diferença. O meu processo de evolução. Holly está muito bem fisicamente, sempre esteve, é uma atleta que está sempre treinada, porém ela ainda não está na evolução. ela tem o jogo dela. O jogo da Holly é aquele jogo. E eu tô em evolução. Então, eu acredito que eu possa trazer isso como uma forma de vencer essa luta e uma vantagem para mim.
Yeah, absolutely. You could call it a perfect storm if you wanted to, because I have to say that I feel the best I've ever felt physically, mentally, technically, looking at my fighting, you know. Things have never been better for me, and I have so few problems. I'm so tranquil. I have such peace of mind in this kind of final stretch leading up to the fight that it's almost strange, you know. It's a strange place to be in, but it's a place that I'm absolutely delighted to be in. I'm 100% focused, and I feel that this is a fight that's absolutely going to change my life. You know, I want to put on a show. I want to show fans what I'm all about, and to really win over the fight fans. You know, because I feel that's something that would be fantastic for me. It's something that I'm able to do, and I want to become a star. I think that's this fight, as I said, is the perfect opportunity for me to do that. Technically and physically, I was referring before to my evolution and how I've been improving fight on fight. And I feel that I continue on that upward trend. I feel that I've been developing more and more, and that I have even more to offer in that sense. Listen, Holly, of course, she's really experienced, but I've been developing a lot. I'm on that upward trend and gaining more experience, training upon training, fight upon fight. I feel that I'm getting better and better. And to be honest, I see that's not really something that the other fighters necessarily have. That's an advantage that I have over my competitors that I see. And so, taking all of that, I want to take this opportunity to display or to showcase a more aggressive Norma, a more technical Norma, and a Norma who's only going to get better and better. Listen, of course, Holly is very experienced. She's a fantastic fighter. She's in great shape, as she's always been, and she's really well trained as well, as has always been the case throughout her career. But she's not on that upward trend anymore. She's not necessarily improving anymore, whereas I am. So I feel that's maybe an advantage I have over her, and I feel that's a point where I can win this fight.
On paper, this fight is incredible. You know, you with your Sanda background and her boxing and kickboxing, we were going to see a great fight. How do you envision yourself finishing Holly Holm?
So, no papel, essa é uma luta realmente muito empolgante, né? A gente sabe o seu estilo de lutar, o controle e o quanto você está confortável lutando em pé. E a gente sabe também da técnica, da qualidade que a Holly tem no boxe, no kickbox dela, né? Então, como é que você enxerga esse contraste, assim, esse casamento de estilos? De que maneira a luta deve desenrolar, levando em conta isso tudo? E é basicamente isso, né? Então, qual seria a sua resposta para isso tudo?
Segredo. Brincadeira. O que acontece? A Holly tem um jogo defensivo e eu sou contra-golpeadora. Então, pode ser que seja uma luta que vai ser resolvida nos detalhes. A Holly tem bons chutes, muito perigoso o chute da Holly. Porém, eu tenho mãos muito pesadas e a gente vai trabalhar isso durante a luta ali. E acredito que quem conseguir impor o seu jogo possivelmente consiga uma vitória. Eu acredito que é uma luta que termina ou por pontos ou por nocaute. E é isso. Eu acredito que as duas vão estar buscando a mesma coisa. O resto é segredo.
Well then, that's a secret. I couldn't possibly answer that question. But yeah, absolutely. You know, the contrast in styles is something that's really interesting there. And as we know, you know, those of us who pay attention to the fight game, me and my team, when we analyze, we see that Holly has a very defensive style. She's got a defensive game. Whereas I'm maybe what could be considered somewhat of a counter striker. Obviously, kickboxing background, boxing background. She's got strong kicks. But listen, I've got a heavy hand. And when it connects, they know all about it. So it's probably a question of whoever manages best to best impose or to best imprint upon the fight, their style is probably going to come away with this one. And I would imagine that the fight will either be decided on points or by knockout. Those are the possible outcomes that I envisage. And as I said, the rest is top secret.
All right. Secrets. I always love secrets. Now, one last question. Which fight do you think is a bigger upset? Holly Holm knocking out Ronda Rousey or Miesha Tate choking out Holly Holm?
Então, para você, acho que essa é a última que te faço. Qual para você seria a maior zebra, né? A vitória da Miesha Tate sobre o Holly Holm ou a vitória do Holly Holm sobre a Ronda?
Acredito que Miesha Tate contra Holly, porque era uma luta difícil, era difícil de dar. A Holly defende muito bem as quedas, então era de fato difícil e movimenta muito. Então a Miesha teria que cercar e derrubá-la, e conseguiu isso faltando menos de 1 minuto para acabar a luta, uma luta de 5 rounds. Então foi muito mais difícil. A Holly, quando ganhou da Ronda Rousey, a Ronda cometeu um grande erro ali, para mim. Ela já estava errando nas lutas passadas, de achar realmente que ela tinha controlado e dominado a trocação, sendo que ela não tinha dominado a trocação. A trocação dela, para quem é um striker, a gente olha e fala, tá ruim, não tá boa. E ela cometeu essa falha contra a Holly Holm, de achar que ela sabia mais trocar o kickbox do que a Holly. Então, foi ali onde ela errou. Eu assisti essa luta, já era madrugada no Brasil, e eu fiquei para assistir, acordada até 3 da manhã para assistir essa luta, porque eu imaginei que a Ronda perderia o cinturão nesse dia, porque ela achou que dominou uma arte que ela ainda não conhecia.
So then, good question. To me, the bigger upset of the two would be Miesha Tate's victory over Holly Holm. And that's because when you look at the probabilities there, when you analyze the fighters and you do the breakdown in styles, you can see that Holly has excellent defense. She's really good at defending takedowns. And the way that the fight panned out, well, Michelle, she had less than a minute in the last round to be able to take advantage of those points that aren't even weak points in Holly's game, and she was able to do that against all of the odds. So that was absolutely incredible. On the other hand, the Ronda defeat to Holly, I didn't necessarily feel was that much of an upset. I think that Ronda, not only in that fight, I think this was an error that she was kind of making in other fights leading up to that. She kind of naively seemed to think that she had greater control, that she was a superior striker to her opponent, whoever the opponent was. Against Holly Holm, that led to her thinking that she had superior kickboxing, that in any sort of striking encounter, she was going to come out on top. And, that it turned out that obviously wasn't the case. And I can say, in fact, that night, I had imagined, my prediction for the fight was that Holly was going to win. And I stayed up until 3 in the morning in Brazil. I was in Brazil at the time. I stayed up until 3 in the morning to watch it. And the fight panned out the way I had predicted. So I didn't necessarily consider that one to be an upset. But as I said, the one with Miesha Tate over Holly was certainly impressive, and certainly a victory that we could consider against the odds, not least because of how the fight panned out.
All right. Just like how you stayed up to watch Holly Holm at 3 a.m. in the morning, there's going to be people in the world getting up at 3 a.m. to watch you fight on October 16th. Thank you so much, Norma, for the time. It was great chatting with you, and hopefully we get many more in the future.
Então, assim como você ficou acordado para ver a luta entre a Ronda e a Holly, né? Assim como você ficou acordado até as 3 da manhã, vai ter muitos fãs, né? Vai ter toda uma legião de fãs, mundo afora, acordado até altas horas para ver você em ação no dia 16 de outubro. Então, já não vejo a hora da luta, acho que vai ser muito legal para todo mundo. E, queria só te agradecer por ter vindo aqui bater um papo com a gente, né? A gente fica realmente muito agradecido por você ser tão generosa com o seu tempo, uma vez que a gente sabe que você está tão ocupada agora nessa reta final.
Eu que agradeço, obrigado pelo convite, e é isso, 16 de outubro, eu espero que todos nós nos divertimos muito, independente do resultado, que seja assim, uma luta para entrar para a história como uma das melhores.
So then, that's it. 16th of October, I'm in action, and I hope that absolutely everybody enjoys it, and I hope that it's a fight that goes down in history, that it's an entertaining fight regardless of the outcome.